At 67 years old, June Whitfield still believed that families were supposed to protect each other. That blood was a contract nobody could break. That the three sisters who had grown up sharing a bedroom in their mother's narrow house on Sycamore Street would stand together when it mattered most. She believed this on a Tuesday afternoon in April, sitting in the office of Raymond Goss, attorney at law, surrounded by the smell of old leather and fresh betrayal, as her older sisters, Charlotte and Vivian, divided their dead mother's life between them like vultures carving meat off a carcass. "The diamond necklace to Charlotte," Raymond read, his voice careful and flat. "The pearl earrings and matching bracelet to Vivian. The emerald ring, gifted by Walter Whitfield Sr. in 1962, to Charlotte. The sapphire brooch collection, 11 pieces, to Vivian." Each name landed like a door closing. Charlotte sat in the leather chair to June's left, legs crossed, handbag in her lap, nodding at each bequest with the satisfied expression of someone confirming what she already knew. Vivian sat to June's right, dabbing her eyes with a tissue she hadn't actually needed, performing grief the way she'd performed everything her entire life, beautifully and without sincerity. June sat between them, waiting. Raymond turned a page. He paused. Something crossed his face, not quite embarrassment, but adjacent to it. The expression of a man who has delivered bad news professionally for 30 years and still hasn't made peace with it. "To my youngest daughter, June Marie Whitfield," he read, "I leave the upright piano currently located in the living room of my residence at 14 Sycamore Street, Hallowell, Virginia. This piano is given with the express instruction that it must not be sold, dismantled, or destroyed. June is to keep it, care for it, and understand that some instruments hold more than music." That was it. Charlotte got $340,000 in jewelry. Vivian got $280,000 in jewelry. June got a dusty piano that hadn't been tuned since 1991. Charlotte actually laughed, not loudly, just a small, clipped sound, the kind of laugh people make when they've won, and want you to know it without technically being cruel about it. Vivian reached over and patted June's hand with fingers that were already mentally wearing the pearl bracelet. "Mom always loved that piano," Vivian said, as if this explained everything, as if $620,000 worth of precious stones divided between two daughters and a broken piano given to the third was simply a mother expressing different kinds of love in different currencies. June said nothing. She sat very still and looked at the attorney's desk and felt the specific kind of pain that comes not from being forgotten, but from being remembered last and least by the person who was supposed to love you first and most. If you've ever been the one who got what nobody else wanted, if you've ever watched your family divide the good things among themselves and hand you the leftovers with a smile, if you've ever wondered whether the people who raised you actually saw you at all, then this story is going to feel like it was written with your heartbeat. Welcome to Hearts Don't Rust. Subscribe now, because what June discovered hidden inside that dusty piano didn't just change her life. It exposed a secret her mother had been keeping for 42 years, a secret that made $620,000 in jewelry look like pocket change. June Marie Whitfield was born on September 9, 1959, the third and final daughter of Margaret and Walter Whitfield. Charlotte had arrived in 1951, Vivian in 1954. By the time June came along 5 years later, and unplanned, the family had already arranged itself into a shape that didn't include a third point. Walter Whitfield was a jeweler. He owned Whitfield and Sons on Main Street in Hollowell, a small shop with a green awning and a brass bell above the door that had been in the family since Walter's father opened it in 1928. Walter was good at his work. Not brilliant, not famous, but good. Steady hands, patient eye. The kind of craftsman who could take a rough stone and see the finished piece inside it, the way a sculptor sees a figure inside marble. He made engagement rings for half the county. He repaired watches for the other half. He was respected, comfortable, and quietly proud of a legacy built on precision and trust. Margaret was a pianist. That was how people described her, even though she hadn't performed publicly since 1958, the year before June was born. Margaret Callahan before marriage. She had been the most gifted music student Hollowell had ever produced. She'd earned a full scholarship to the Richmond Conservatory at 17, graduated top of her class at 21, and spent 3 years performing in recital halls across Virginia and the Carolinas. Small halls, mostly. Church auditoriums and college theaters, and the kind of venues where the audience knew enough about music to appreciate what they were hearing. She played Chopin like she was having a private conversation with him. She played Debussy like water finding its way downhill. She played with a quality that music critics, the few who reviewed her performances, described as intimate, not showy, not aggressive, intimate, as if she were letting you hear something she usually kept to herself. Then she married Walter in 1950, had Charlotte in 1951, and the recital halls went quiet. That's how it worked in Hollowell in the 1950s. A woman could be brilliant, or she could be a wife. She could play Chopin, or she could change diapers. She couldn't do both, because the world hadn't yet built a structure that allowed for both. And Margaret, who had spent her entire youth inside music, spent her entire adulthood inside a house. But she kept the piano. A 1924 Steinway Model K upright, 52 inches tall, ebony case, ivory keys. Walter had bought it for her as a wedding gift, spending $800 he didn't have in 1950 because he'd heard her play once at a church fundraiser and understood, even as a man who worked with stones and metal, that some materials are more precious than gems. Margaret played that piano every day for the rest of her life. Every single day. Morning or evening, sometimes both. Charlotte and Vivian grew up hearing it through the walls, a background soundtrack they took for granted, the way children take gravity for granted. But June, the youngest, the unexpected one, the quiet girl who arrived 5 years after the family had decided it was complete, June didn't just hear the piano. She listened. From the time she could walk, June would sit on the floor next to the piano bench and press her small hands against the wooden case while Margaret played, feeling the vibrations travel through the wood and into her palms. Margaret noticed. She noticed everything about June, though she was careful not to show it, because showing favoritism in a house with 3 daughters was like lighting a match in a room full of gas. When June was 6, Margaret began teaching her. Not Charlotte, who had no interest, not Vivian, who had tried for 2 weeks and quit because her fingers hurt. June. They sat together on the bench every afternoon from 3:30 to 5, Margaret's hands guiding June's, showing her where the notes lived, how to listen for the space between sounds, how to let the music breathe instead of pushing it. "Music isn't something you make, Junebug," Margaret would say, using the nickname only she used. "It's something you uncover. It's already inside the piano. Your job is to find it." By the time June was 12, she could play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major with a maturity that made Margaret cry. By 15, she was better than Margaret had been at the same age. By 17, she had been offered a scholarship to the same conservatory her mother had attended, the Richmond Conservatory, of music, full tuition, room and board. Margaret had wept when the letter arrived. Walter had framed it. Charlotte, 26, and already married to a dentist in Norfolk, had said, "Well, someone had to get the music gene." Vivian, 23, and engaged to a real estate developer in Richmond, had said, "I hope she meets someone nice there." June went to Richmond. She studied for 2 years. She was, according to her professors, extraordinary. She had Margaret's intimacy and something else, a depth of feeling that made audiences go still, the kind of playing that doesn't just fill a room, but empties it of everything except the sound. Then Walter had his first heart attack. June was 19. She came home for a weekend that turned into a month, that turned into a year, that turned into forever. Walter recovered, but slowly, and the shop needed someone at the counter while he sat in the back doing repairs. Charlotte was in Norfolk. Vivian was in Richmond. June was the one who was there, the one who was always there, the one who dropped everything because someone had to and nobody else would. She never went back to the conservatory. The scholarship expired. The professors wrote letters she didn't answer. The recital halls that might have had her name on their programs filled with other names, other hands, other daughters who hadn't been needed at home. June worked at Whitfield and Sons for the next 44 years. She learned the jewelry trade from Walter not because she loved it, but because he needed her, and she loved him. She kept the books. She handled customers. She cleaned the display cases and swept the floors and locked up at night. When Walter died in 1998, she kept the shop running alone, because closing it would have meant losing the last piece of him, and June Whitfield did not let go of things she loved. She never married, not because she didn't want to, but because the years slipped by the way they do when you're busy being needed, and by the time she looked up from the counter, she was 50, and the town's eligible men had all been claimed by women who'd had the time to be eligible. She played the piano. Every night, after closing the shop, she'd go to 14 Sycamore Street, where she still lived with Margaret, and she'd sit at the Steinway and play. Margaret would listen from her chair, eyes closed, hands folded, and sometimes June would catch her mother moving her fingers slightly in her lap, playing along in silence, matching June note for note from memory. Charlotte visited twice a year, Christmas and Mother's Day. She brought expensive gifts and left before dinner. Her husband, the dentist, made $400,000 a year, and Charlotte had developed the particular brand of generosity that comes from wealth, the kind that gives objects instead of time and considers the transaction complete. Vivian visited slightly more often, but her visits were performances. She'd sweep in wearing clothes that cost more than June made in a month, kiss Margaret on both cheeks like a French actress, talk about her husband's real estate projects and her son's law school applications, and leave behind a trail of perfume and the distinct impression that she'd rather be somewhere else. June was the one who was there. She was there when Margaret fell in the bathroom and broke her hip in 2012. She was there for the surgery, the rehab, the months of physical therapy. She was there when Margaret's memory started to slip in 2018, when the names of grandchildren became confused and the dates of birthdays blurred together. She was there when Margaret stopped being able to cook for herself, when she needed help bathing, when the woman who had once played Chopin with enough beauty to silence a room couldn't remember how to button her own blouse. Charlotte sent money. Vivian sent flowers. June sent herself every day, every night, for 6 years. Margaret Whitfield died on February 3rd, 2026, at the age of 96, in the house on Sycamore Street, in the bed she'd shared with Walter, with June holding her hand. Her last coherent words, spoken 3 days before the end, were directed at June. "The piano, Junebug. Don't let them take the piano. Everything is inside. Everything I couldn't say." June had assumed it was the dementia talking, the confused, fragmented language of a mind coming apart. She'd squeezed her mother's hand and said, "I won't, Mama. I promise." Now, sitting in Raymond Goss's office 6 weeks later, watching Charlotte and Vivian divide $620,000 in jewelry between themselves, while she received a piano she already played every night, June finally understood that her mother's last words hadn't been confusion at all. They'd been instructions. The will was airtight. Raymond confirmed this twice when Charlotte, emboldened by the reading, casually suggested that the piano should really be appraised and its value added to the estate for fair distribution. Raymond shook his head. "Margaret was very specific," he said. "The piano goes to June, exclusively, irrevocably. It is not part of the divisible estate." She also specified, and I'll read this directly, "The piano must not be appraised, sold, or otherwise treated as a financial asset. It is a personal bequest of sentimental and instructional value only." Charlotte rolled her eyes. "Instructional value. A piano nobody's tuned in 30 years. 35, June said quietly. "It hasn't been tuned since 1991. "So it's worthless," Vivian said, with the particular smile she used when she was being cruel and wanted you to think she was being kind. "But it's very sentimental, Junie. Mom knew how much you loved that old thing." That old thing. The Steinway Model K that Walter had spent a month's salary on. The piano that Margaret had played every day for 72 years. The instrument that had taught June everything she knew about beauty and patience and listening. That old thing. June drove home to Sycamore Street that afternoon. The house was empty now in a way it hadn't been before. Margaret's absence was a physical thing, a weight in the air, a silence that had texture. The furniture was the same. The curtains were the same. The kitchen still smelled faintly of the lavender soap Margaret had used for decades. But the center was gone. The woman around whom this entire house had organized itself for 70 years had left, and everything that remained was just matter without meaning, except the piano. It stood where it had always stood, against the east wall of the living room, between the window and the bookshelf. A 1924 Steinway Model K upright, 52 inches tall, ebony case now dulled with decades of dust and neglect. The ivory keys were yellowed. Several were chipped. The wood was scratched in places where children's toys had bumped against it and where Margaret's wedding ring had clicked against the case during thousands of hours of playing. The sustain pedal was stuck. When June pressed a key, the sound that came out was hollow and wrong, like a voice that had been crying too long. But June didn't sit down to play. She stood in front of the piano and thought about her mother's words. "Everything is inside, everything I couldn't say." She thought about the will. Some instruments hold more than music. She thought about 42 years. Margaret had played this piano every single day from 1950 until her hands could no longer manage the keys, sometime around 2022. 72 years. And in all that time, she had never once allowed anyone to tune it, repair it, or open the case. June had offered dozens of times. Margaret had always refused. "It sounds fine to me, Junebug. Leave it be." June walked to the back of the piano and examined the rear panel. It was held in place by 8 screws, old slotted brass screws that hadn't been touched in decades. She went to the kitchen, found Walter's old toolbox under the sink, and selected a screwdriver. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. The first screw turned with difficulty, grinding against wood that had swollen and dried and swollen again over decades. The second was easier. By the fourth, she'd found the rhythm. By the eighth, the panel was loose. She pulled it away carefully, setting it on the carpet behind her, and looked inside the piano. The interior of an upright piano is a dense, complex space. Strings stretched vertically across a cast-iron plate. Hammers lined up in rows. Dampers, felt pads, wooden bridges. It's a small city of mechanical parts, each one precisely positioned to turn the movement of a finger into a sound that can make people weep. But this piano had something else, something that didn't belong, taped to the inside of the cast-iron plate, protected by a layer of wax paper that had yellowed but hadn't deteriorated, were envelopes. Dozens of them, maybe 50 or 60, arranged in neat rows, each one secured with a small piece of surgical tape, each one labeled in Margaret's handwriting with a date. The earliest date June could see was June 1984. The latest was December 2021. June's hands were shaking. She reached inside and carefully peeled the first envelope from the plate. It was thick. She opened it. Inside was a letter written in Margaret's precise musical handwriting and 3 photographs. The letter was dated June 9th, 1984, and it began, "My dearest Junebug, today you are 25 years old. I am writing this inside the piano because it is the only place in this house your sisters will never look. Charlotte thinks pianos are furniture. Vivian thinks they're decorations, but you know what a piano really is. It's a place where feelings go when they have nowhere else to live. This is the first of many letters I will leave for you here. One for every year, sometimes more. When I am gone and your sisters have taken what they believe is valuable, you will open this piano and find what is actually valuable. Not the letters, though I hope they bring you comfort. Keep reading, Junebug. Keep opening envelopes. The deeper you go, the more you'll understand." June sat on the living room floor and opened envelope after envelope. Each one contained a letter. Each letter was a conversation Margaret had been having with June for nearly 40 years, a conversation conducted in secret, hidden inside the one object she knew her youngest daughter would never abandon. The letters told a story. In the 1984 letter, Margaret wrote about the day June left the conservatory. "I know why you came home, and I will carry the guilt of it for the rest of my life. You had a gift that the world deserved to hear, and you gave it up for us. Your father doesn't understand what you sacrificed. Your sisters never will. But I know, Junebug. I know exactly what it cost you, and I have started making it right. In the 1989 letter, I have been saving, every month, from every source I can find without your father noticing. The household budget has margins if you know where to look. $1 here from the grocery allowance, $3 there from returning bottles. I've opened an account at First National in Roanoke, not Hollowell, where people would talk. It's in both our names, but the statements come to a post office box only I have the key to. The balance as of today is $4,200. It isn't much yet, but pennies become rivers if you give them enough time. In the 1994 letter, the account has $23,000 now. I've also been buying Treasury bonds through the mail, $50 at a time. Nobody notices $50. I keep the certificates in the piano. Look behind the damper rail, Junebug, the left side. June moved to the piano and looked behind the damper rail on the left side. There, in a space no wider than a credit card, rolled into a tight cylinder and wrapped in wax paper, were U.S. Treasury bonds, dozens of them. Series EE savings bonds purchased between 1986 and 2019, each one worth $50 at purchase. June knew enough about bonds to know that Series EE bonds double in value after 20 years and continue accruing interest for 30. Some of these were 40 years old. She kept reading. In the 2001 letter, written the year after Walter's death, your father's life insurance was $150,000. Charlotte and Vivian expected me to divide it 3 ways. Instead, I told them I needed it for living expenses, which was true partly. I've added $100,000 to the account in Roanoke. The balance is now $187,000. The bonds are worth approximately $40,000 at current value. Junebug, I know you don't know about any of this. I know you're out there right now closing up the shop, and you'll come home and make me dinner and play the piano and never ask for a single thing in return. That's why I'm doing this. Because you don't ask. Because you never ask. Because the people who never ask are the ones who deserve the most. In the 2008 letter, I've been investing. Don't laugh, Junebug. Your mother learned about the stock market. There's a woman at the Roanoke Bank, Mrs. Phyllis Chen, who manages accounts for people like me, people who have patience and no one watching over their shoulder. She put the money into index funds. I don't fully understand what that means, but I understand the numbers on the statements. The account is now worth $412,000. The bonds are worth approximately $78,000. Everything is yours, baby girl, every cent. When I die, your sisters will take the jewelry because jewelry is what they understand. Things that sparkle, things that impress, things you can wear to a dinner party and make other women jealous. Let them have it. What I'm leaving you doesn't sparkle, it compounds. June had to stop reading. She was crying so hard that the ink on the pages was in danger of running. She set the letters on the carpet and pressed her hands against her eyes and sobbed the way she hadn't sobbed since the day she left the conservatory. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from the place where 42 years of silence had been stored. When she could see again, she opened the most recent envelope, dated December 2021. The handwriting was shakier. The letters were larger, the lines less straight. Margaret's hands had been failing by then. Junebug. My mind is going and I can feel it leaving, like water running out of a bathtub, slow at first and then all at once. I need to tell you the rest while I still can. In the base of the piano, below the pedal mechanism, there is a compartment your father built for me in 1983. He was the only other person who knew about it. He helped me because he knew what I was doing, and he loved you enough to keep the secret. Inside that compartment, you will find the account documents, the bond certificates I couldn't fit behind the damper rail, and a letter from Mrs. Chen at First National Roanoke explaining how to access everything. As of my last statement, the investment account holds $1,340,000. The bonds are worth approximately $126,000. There is also a separate savings account with $47,000 in cash. The total is approximately $1.5 million. It's yours, all of it. I accumulated it over 37 years from money that nobody missed, money that nobody counted, money that was invisible because I was invisible, and invisible women have the power to do invisible things. Your sisters will take the jewelry and think they've won. Let them think that. Jewelry depreciates. Patience doesn't. I love you more than Chopin loved nocturnes, more than Debussy loved the rain, more than any note I ever played on this piano. You were my best composition, Junebug, the one I worked on every day for 67 years. Don't let anyone tell you that staying was a sacrifice. Staying was a choice, and it was the right one. Your mama, Margaret. Below the pedal mechanism, exactly where Margaret described, was a compartment. Walter had built it beautifully, the way he built everything, with precision and care and invisible joints. Inside was a fireproof document bag containing bank statements, investment summaries, bond certificates, and a notarized letter from Phyllis Chen at First National Bank of Roanoke, confirming that June Marie Whitfield was the sole beneficiary of accounts totaling $1,513,847.22 as of the most recent quarterly statement, $1,513,847, hidden inside a dusty piano by a woman who had spent her entire adult life being underestimated. June sat on the floor of her mother's living room, surrounded by 38 years of love letters and half a century of treasury bonds, and the quiet evidence that Margaret Whitfield had been the most brilliant financial mind in Hallowell, Virginia. And nobody had ever known it, because she was a woman who played the piano and made dinner, and was supposed to be satisfied with that. The next morning, June drove to Roanoke. She met Phyllis Chen, who was 74 now and semi-retired, but had kept Margaret's accounts active out of a loyalty that went beyond professional obligation. Phyllis was a small woman with sharp eyes and the kind of handshake that makes you pay attention. "Your mother was remarkable," Phyllis said, sitting across from June in a private office at the bank. "She came to me in 1996 with $187,000 and a very clear instruction. She said, 'I need this money to grow for at least 25 years. I need it to be invisible, and I need it to end up in my daughter's hands.' I asked which daughter. She said, 'The one who stays.'" Phyllis explained the portfolio. Margaret had been conservative at first, savings accounts and CDOs. Then, on Phyllis's advice, she'd moved into index funds in 2002, right after the market dip. The timing had been fortunate. The money had grown steadily for 2 decades, compounding quietly in an account that nobody in Hallowell knew existed. "She came to see me once a year," Phyllis continued, "always alone, always by bus, never by car, because she didn't want anyone tracking her mileage. She'd review the statements, ask careful questions, and leave. She never withdrew a penny, not once in 28 years. She said withdrawing would be like pulling a plant up to check if the roots were growing." June transferred the accounts into her name that afternoon. She also cashed the Treasury bonds, which had matured to a combined value of $131,400. The total across all accounts was just over $1.6 million. She drove home to Hallowell with the windows down and Chopin playing from her phone and the strange, displaced feeling of being simultaneously the poorest and the richest she had ever been in her life. She did not call Charlotte. She did not call Vivian. She didn't owe them the information, and she didn't trust them with it. Over the following weeks, June did three things. First, she hired a master piano technician from Richmond to restore the Steinway. The man, whose name was Aldrich Baines, arrived expecting a routine tuning and spent 20 minutes just standing in front of the piano with his mouth slightly open. "This is a 1924 Model K," he said, running his hands along the case. "Do you have any idea what this is?" June said she did. Aldrich spent 3 days on the restoration. New strings, new felt on the hammers. The ivory keys were cleaned and stabilized. The ebony case was stripped, repaired, and refinished by hand. When he played the first chord after the work was done, the sound that filled the room was the sound June remembered from childhood, rich and warm and deep, like a voice that had been resting for 35 years and was ready to speak again. The piano itself, Aldrich told June, in this condition, restored with provenance, a 1924 Steinway Model K, is worth approximately $45,000 to $60,000. But honestly, Mrs. Whitfield, if you're thinking of selling it, I'd rather you didn't. Instruments like this don't exist anymore. They built them to last forever. June smiled. "I'm not selling it. My mother told me not to." Second, she established the Margaret Whitfield Music Scholarship at the Richmond Conservatory, a full-ride scholarship for one student per year, funded by a $500,000 endowment that would generate enough annual return to cover tuition, room, and board indefinitely. The only requirement was that the recipient had to be a pianist, and they had to be someone who, in the words of the scholarship description, demonstrates not just technical skill, but the kind of intimate, unhurried musicality that makes listeners forget they're in a room. The conservatory's dean, when June explained the scholarship and its funding source, asked to hear the story. When June finished telling it, the dean was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Your mother should have been on our faculty." "My mother was on her own faculty," June said. "She just held her classes inside a piano." Third, June reopened Whitfield and Sons, not as a jewelry shop, as a music school. She gutted the interior, kept Walter's original display cases as decoration, installed soundproofing and practice rooms, and a small recital hall that seated 30, and placed the restored Steinway at the center of it all. She offered piano lessons to anyone who wanted them, priced on a sliding scale that went all the way down to 0 for families who couldn't afford anything. She taught the way Margaret had taught her, with patience and gentleness and the conviction that music isn't something you make, it's something you uncover. Within 4 months, she had 40 students. Within 8 months, 75. The recital hall hosted performances every Saturday afternoon, free and open to the public. People came from all over the county, and then from neighboring counties, and then from places June had never heard of, because word travels when something real happens in a world full of things that aren't. Charlotte found out about the music school in month 5. She drove down from Norfolk on a Thursday afternoon, walked into Whitfield and Sons without calling ahead, and found June teaching a 9-year-old girl how to play the opening bars of Clair de Lune. Charlotte stood in the doorway and watched for a full minute before June looked up. "Hello, Charlotte." "What is this?" "It's a music school." "Where did you get the money for this?" June finished the lesson, walked the little girl to the door where her mother was waiting, and then turned to face her sister. Charlotte was wearing a silk blouse and $12,000 worth of their mother's jewelry. The diamond necklace was around her neck. The emerald ring was on her finger. She sparkled in the afternoon light like a department store window. "Mom left it for me," June said simply, "inside the piano." Charlotte's expression went through several phases in rapid succession: confusion, calculation, disbelief. And then the one June had been expecting, the one she'd seen on Charlotte's face 100 times growing up: entitlement. Inside the piano. What do you mean, inside the piano? How much? Enough? June, I'm serious. If Mom had money hidden somewhere, that's part of the estate. We need to get Raymond on the phone. This needs to be divided equally. June shook her head slowly. The account was opened in 1989. Mom's name and mine jointly, with right of survivorship. The bonds were purchased in my name. Every cent was accumulated from Margaret's personal household savings over 37 years. None of it was Walter's. None of it was community property. None of it was part of the estate. Raymond has already confirmed this. Charlotte's face went white, then red. "You've already talked to Raymond?" "I have. He reviewed the documents. Everything was structured properly. Mom was very thorough, Charlotte. She had almost 40 years to get it right. This isn't fair." June looked at her sister, looked at the diamond necklace, the emerald ring, the silk blouse, the $80,000 car parked outside the window, and she felt something she hadn't expected. Not anger, not satisfaction, compassion, because Charlotte genuinely believed that fairness meant getting the biggest share, and she would live her entire life inside that belief, and that was its own kind of poverty. "You got the jewelry, Charlotte. Vivian got the jewelry. You both got exactly what Mom wanted you to have. Things that sparkle, things you can show off, things that depreciate the moment you walk out of a room. And I got exactly what Mom wanted me to have. Something that looks worthless. Something nobody would fight over. Something that holds its value in secret and pays out in patience. I'll contest the will." "You can try. But the money was never in the will. It was in the piano. And the piano was given to me." Charlotte left. She did call Raymond. Raymond confirmed everything June had said. Charlotte then called Vivian, and the two of them hired their own attorney, who spent 3 weeks reviewing the documents and concluded that the joint accounts, the bonds, and the hidden savings were entirely outside the estate. Margaret had spent 37 years building a financial structure that was legally unassailable because she'd had 37 years to think about exactly this scenario. She had known her older daughters. She had known what they would do. And she had prepared the way only a woman with patience and a piano and nothing but time can prepare. Vivian showed up in month 7. She was softer than Charlotte. She came alone, without a lawyer, without the pearl bracelet. She sat in the recital hall and listened to a 14-year-old boy play Rachmaninoff, and when he finished, Vivian was crying. "He's wonderful," she said. "He's from a family that can't afford lessons," June said. "Mom is paying for him." Vivian was quiet for a long time. Then, "I didn't know she could do that. The saving, the investing. I didn't know she was that person." Nobody did. That was the point. "June, I'm sorry. Not about the money. About everything. About never coming home. About leaving you to do it all alone. About pretending that sending flowers was the same as being here." June looked at her sister and saw, for the first time in decades, the 5-year-old girl who used to climb into her bed during thunderstorms. The girl before the performance began. "You can come to the recital on Saturday," June said. "Bring your grandchildren. There's a little girl who's going to play Debussy, and she sounds like Mom." Vivian came on Saturday. She brought her grandchildren. She cried during the Debussy. Charlotte never came back. Not to the school, not to the recitals, not to Sycamore Street. The diamond necklace was appraised the following year at $95,000, roughly $40,000 less than Charlotte had believed. She wore it less and less after that. Diamonds, it turns out, are only valuable when someone else is looking. The Steinway sits in the recital hall of the Whitfield Music School on Main Street in Hallowell, Virginia. It is played every day, usually by June, sometimes by students who have earned the privilege. Its sound fills the room the way Margaret's playing once filled the house on Sycamore Street, intimate and unhurried, and full of the kind of feeling that people spend their whole lives trying to put into words and never quite manage. Inside the piano, taped to the cast-iron plate where the envelopes once hung, June has placed a small brass plaque. It reads, "This piano belonged to Margaret Callahan Whitfield, 1930 to 2026. She played it every day for 72 years. She hid love inside it for 38. Some instruments hold more than music. My heart overflows with gratitude that you stayed with June through every moment of this extraordinary journey." From the attorney's office, where her sisters took the jewelry to the living room floor, where she opened her mother's letters. From the woman the world called ordinary to the discovery that her mother was anything but. If this story touched something deep inside you, if you've ever been the one who stayed when everyone else left, if you've ever been given the thing nobody else wanted and discovered it was worth more than everything they fought over, if you've ever realized that the person who loved you most showed it not with diamonds but with patience, then leave just one word in the comments, one word that describes the moment you understood your own value. Because June's story proves something that diamonds can't, that patience compounds and entitlement depreciates, that the things that sparkle aren't always the things that matter, that a mother's love will find a way to reach you, even if she has to hide it inside a piano for 38 years, that staying is not a sacrifice when it's a choice, and that the people who take the jewelry always come looking for the music eventually. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that what looks like nothing might hold everything, that the quiet ones are often the strongest ones, that a dusty piano in a dead woman's living room can hold more treasure than a jewelry box worth $620,000, and that love, when it's real, when it's patient, when it's hidden in the one place only the right person will look, love doesn't just survive, it compounds, because together we prove that hearts don't rust, that music doesn't fade, and that sometimes the greatest fortune is the one that was never meant to sparkle. Welcome to our family. We'll see you in the next story.